So, we've been studying in the word of, in the book of Genesis, studying the history of creation, which really is the history of the Creator. Okay. Basically, God reveals himself through his creation. So when we begin to understand the history of creation that has gone on for such a long time, we have far older and filled with far more variety of creatures and places than we can ever begin to imagine, than can ever be shown in any science fiction movie or anything of that sort. Man just does not possess the capability to process the scale on which God is functioning both in his creation. We don't even have any clue as to how big this earth is, never mind what else exists up there in the heavens and in the city of God, which is called the heaven. Okay, so let's begin by again continuing our study in the book of Genesis. So I've been reading this from the 1611 King James Version, and the reason for doing that is that this is my favorite version of the English Bible, and then there are certain things in here which sadly are not found in most modern Bibles, even in the New King, in what we call the King James Bible. Okay. The difference between the 1611 and the King James, which I've explained many times, is that in the late 1800s, this 1611 was revised in that, spellings of the language, the grammar, and other rules of language had changed over that time. So it was brought up to date by changing a lot of the spellings, so they are not archaic. Because, for example, in those days, the U and the V, they were kind of interchangeable. So if you look at the spelling in this year of heaven, for example, on the screen, it looks like a spelling H-E-A-U-E-E-U-E-N, but that is not. That is actually a V and the U. And I has done a study on that one time as to why it was like that, but I don't exactly remember now, so I won't go there. But, so in that 1800s, they did was that they separated these two letters and they standardized the spellings and they changed some punctuation and stuff. So there are some differences between the King James and the 1611, although they are almost identical. Okay. So I like this one here because in this here, there are certain things like, for example, top of the page, they will have a heading that what this information will be on this page, and it says the creation of the world. Then it gives you the title of the book. In the English language, we call this book Genesis. In the Hebrew, it was just called In the Beginning. Okay, that was the name. The word Genesis was given to it by the Greeks, and that's why V has come down to us in the English language. And that word Genesis has a great study in itself, with just the meaning of that word in the Greek language and all the associated words with that, especially the word beget. Jesus said that in case of Christ, he is told that God gave his only begotten son. In the book of John, in 1 John, we read about, God has begotten us. And as Peter said, God has begotten us to so those idea of begetting is the idea of reproduction, of taking an original and to reproducing it. And in this case, God is the original and he's making copies of himself. And that is contained in the very name of this book, Genesis. And therefore, like the studies that you can do just on one word could, last for weeks. So anyhow, so let's continue now. As we have in this year, again, on top of before the text of the Bible begins, these translators, they had put some information. They just gave us a short summary of what will be contained in this chapter. And chapter 1, then it tells us it's about the creation of the heaven of the earth and earth of the light. which I will talk about later, because I think that is not quite correct, that this is not about the creation of the light, because God did not create light. Light itself is God is light, and God has always existed. So light has always existed. Therefore, God, light is not necessarily created. Of the earth separated from the waters. And this is a very, very interesting, the way even this summary has been given. See, if you look at here, it says the creation of heaven and earth, and both the heaven, H, and the E in this are capital letters. So they are telling us that these are proper nouns, that this heaven is one place and the earth is one place. They are unique places. So that is identified both in their summary notes and also in the actual text of the Bible. Because in this one, whereas most modern versions, they just say, in the beginning, God created the heavens. And even in the King James, say in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. It doesn't say heavens, so it says the heaven. But the heaven is not capitalized in most King James Bibles out there. But in this one, it is. So again, it identifies these two places as unique places. And that's why it capitalizes it, making them proper nouns, which tells us that, there is one place called the heaven and there is one place called the earth. But in this here, and then it tells us of the earth separated from the waters, which again is that the earth. And now it is not capitalized anymore. And this is, because the earth can also be used as a noun, not necessarily as a proper noun, meaning it can mean dirt, it can mean dry land. So when we use it in that sense, it can mean soil, then it doesn't need to be capitalized anymore. These are just things about grammar, which, sadly, most of us do not understand these days, but there is significance in even the way a word is written on the page. Of the earth separated from the waters. But what it is telling us in verse 1 is that earth and heaven are created. And then when it gets down to verse 9, where the earth is being separated and the waters are being separated, it is quite clear, even from this summary that these translators gave us, that they're not saying that the earth is being created now. They're just saying the earth was created at some time in the past. And now the waters that are on the face of the earth and the dry land are going to be separated, okay? And made fruitful of the sun, moon, and stars, of fish and fowl. And again, the sun, moon, and stars are capitalized here, which tells us one more time that these are all proper nouns, and they are proper, given a proper noun is given to something to identify it as something that is unique. And that's what is done here. Of fish and fowl, beasts and cattle, man in the image of God, also for the appointment of food. Okay, so we've already read that, so let's keep going. So these first two verses, which I've spent a considerable amount of time on, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So in these two verses of Scripture, just in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 and verse 2 is contained the majority of the history of the ages, majority of the history of the ages of creation. Verse 1 is age 1, which is when God actually began the creative process, beginning with the city of heaven. And then he continued with the creation of the earth and continued at that time, I'm sure, with the creation of heavenly bodies, okay? Because we do read in Job 38 that the morning stars sang together, stars being symbolic of angels, that these heavenly bodies and heavenly creatures were created in this verse of Scripture. So all that creative, the formation, the building of he says, my hands have built all things. So all this building went on in this age, which was the first stage of creation, when yet evil had not come into God's creation, when darkness, sin, death, all these things were absent from it. So it was a time of perfection. It was a time of there are all these myths and legends about, such as that of Atlantis, that these worlds existed in the past. They were very highly advanced technological worlds. And that is how creation begins. Creation doesn't begin, everything in this world being alive that tell us about evolution, that everything began in a state of chaos. And then from there, it developed and grew and advanced to bring us to the point where we are today. But in the Bible is quite the reverse. Everything begins in perfection. Everything begins in a very high state of technology. And then from there, it begins to deteriorate. It begins to decay and corrupt. Once evil enters in, and wherever evil comes in, it brings decay and ultimately destruction. So the first stage is the age of building and construction. And in verse 2, so between verse 1 and verse 2, that construction slowly began to be destroyed. Into that fit these ages of destruction of God's creation, which came about as a result of the birth of evil. And again, the question, is why would God want evil? And that is a question to which I have discussed in the past. We will move on with it when we get to especially the time of the creation of man, and why it was necessary that evil and sin and death in particular be present in creation before God would make man, because man was destined to be created, to be transformed into the image, to be an exact copy of the person of God. And that could not happen unless evil and death were present in God's creation. So these ages that followed the age of construction of building, they are the ages of the birth and the growth and the maturing of evil. Evil was born in this creature called the anointed cherub. Okay, the cherubim, which is the plural of the word cherub, they are very high angelic princes. Okay, they are the royalty of the angels, of the races of angels. There are many races of angels, and there's a hierarchy of this angelic spirit creatures. Angels are basically creatures of spirit. They are not creatures of flesh, okay, like us. They are not corporeal, but they do have shape. They do have a person. They do have power. And in that respect, in this time, they are higher than mankind. And it's very obvious that the earth is quite far below the city of heaven, where God sits. So we are quite far below. But these angels and these cherubims, especially the cherubim, they sit right with God. So, it's very easy to understand that they are much higher than us being up there while we are down here. So that's what it tells us in Psalm 8, for example, and in the book of Hebrews, that thou hast made him a little lower than the angels. So mankind is lower than the angels, but these are very high creatures. So evil was born in this race of the angelic beings out of the highest order of those angels in the cherubim, who were at that time led, or the chief of those cherubim was this person called the anointed cherub, with this angelic being called the anointed cherub. His story is told us in Ezekiel chapter 28. So after evil had been born, then it grew and matured. So in the beginning of the ages of creation, in the beginning of the time of building and construction, God not just made these heavenly bodies and this terrestrial body called the earth, he also created those inhabitants, those creatures that would inhabit those places. So as I said, we talk about these races of angels, but he also created these other creatures of flesh, corporeal beings that were going to dwell on the earth. They're called sons of God. So there were these races of angels, and there were also these races of the sons of God. There was more than one race. As in the case of Adam, when God made Adam and Eve, he only made one Adam and one Eve. But I believe in the case of these sons of God, there were more. And the reason we have so many races on earth it is, I believe, goes back to this time when God made these sons of God, and they were not all the same race. They were differences in them. And it is from those days and going back to those creatures who eventually came down to the earth and mingled themselves with the children of Adam, with the daughters of Adam, that we get all these different races of mankind that exist on the earth today. Very interesting history, but I don't want to go too much into it. But it is the birth of evil happened through the race of angels. From there, it spread to these sons of God who were on the earth. And of course, I believe they had the technologies to be able to travel up into the heavenly realms, as well as we read about the story of Lucifer, who is the most famous of these sons of God, that he was going to ascend up into heaven. Okay, and from there was a third type of being, a third race of creatures called these dragons and serpents, the serpentine dragon, whose chief is Satan. And then it spread. This evil continued to be born and to grow and to spread. And then it went down into this beastly class. So you can see, there's a degeneration. Evil degenerates, whereas good in God, it lifts us up. It tells us, God has placed us on with him in the heavenly places with Christ. So he has lifted us up from the earth up to where he sits. Whereas in the case of angel, it began with the cherubim who were very close to God, and then it went down to man who was on the earth, and then it went into the beastly class of these creatures that are even lower than man, these serpentine dragons in particular. Okay, so the point here is that there were three chief creatures of evil through whom evil was born, and then it grew and matured. And then each one of these had a time, which I discussed in detail yesterday. They were given a period of time in which the chief of those races was the chief evildoer. First, it was the anointed cherub when the angels were the chiefs of these evildoers. Some of them, not all the angels did not sin, only some of them did. Although, that number that did could be in the millions and billions and whatever, it could be more. We don't know how many there were. Okay. So God appointed them a certain period of time, a certain age in which they did what they were appointed to do, because God needed evil to come into existence, and he had planned it, and he knew that it would come through this anointed cherub. And yet God himself cannot be blamed for the origin of evil. Okay, this is something which seems like paradoxical, that God plans it, but God cannot be blamed for it. But I'm not going to go into that here. Okay, because that is too deep a subject and it needs to be discussed on its own at some point in time. So these angels, their time was when it was up, they were judged and they were cast down into this place called hell, which had been constructed on the earth by that time. So this long history of creation and this long history of these worlds that existed right here on the earth, not just on the surface, but inside the earth and even inside the waters of the earth, how they were built, when they were built, all that was happening in this time period between Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 and verse 2. So many ages. As I said, there are three main ages of evil, but those ages, how long they lasted, we have no idea, but they lasted a very long time. So once these angels were removed from the picture, then the chief, the head honchos, the head princes of evil, that kingdom from the angels was passed, kingdom of evil was given to the sons of God. And these sons of God, the chief one of them, the one that is mentioned by name in the Bible, is Lucifer. And that is that he then set about to make himself into God. He wanted to take and go and sit on the throne of God. That is the kind of power and the technology that they had and the access that they had into these other realms, which we in this day cannot even understand that they exist, let alone have the means to go up there. But they did in those days, okay? So this is the arrogance of this person, that he thinks that he's got the power, the knowledge, and the technology to be able to go up into heaven and to fight God and to take over his throne. So then he too, again, according to the plans of God, because God wrote this story before the foundations of the world, his time was up. And when his time was up, he fell down, like as he was going to ascend up into heaven to try and do war with God. He was cast down, destroyed. His armada, his fleet, whatever he was taking up there with him, destroyed. He is thrown down, and then he is locked up in the pit, just as the angels had been locked away in hell. So he's removed from the scene. So that ends the second age of evil. So you see all these ages are passing while we are yet in that time period between Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 and Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. This is again a lot of repetition in this information. But again, like I repeated, so that everybody can mentally grasp it and to develop a picture in your own mind of these times and ultimately these events that happen. But with us, the understanding is not just going to be that these events happened, this history happened, but we are going to the purpose we are studying is to bring us to the place where we can understand why it happened. So then, once Lucifer and these sons of God, who were going to war against God, had been removed from the picture, then this baton of evil, the kingdom of evil, was handed to this creature called Satan. These are a serpentine dragon races. I discussed their origin a great deal yesterday, so I won't go into that there. But then when they took over this earth, and whatever, somewhere up in the heavenly realm, something they might have had some reach. And then they began to develop their world on this earth. They began to build, all kinds of things, whatever, in any civilization, in any society. What do we need? We need, when we are dwelling as a group, we need, like I'm looking outside, I see homes, I'll see some, I can look, there's the city in there, there's businesses, there's also houses of worship like churches, etc., temples. They're all around us. So there was no different back in that day. So what they had banks then, they had money, they had trading, they had ships, they had trucks, whatever. But they also built a lot of temples. And in this temple, they worshiped the Satan, they worshiped the serpent, they worshiped the dragon. And the evidence of that is all over our earth today. So basically, between Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 to end this here now, there are 4 ages that fit in there. One being the age of construction and building, which is Genesis 1:1. Then before we get to Genesis 1:2, there were these ages of the beginning of evil and corruption entering into God's creation through these angels, first of all. And then when the angels are gone, in the second age of evil, which was led by these sons of God, of Lucifer and his followers, they advance evil even further. Because in that time, at the time of Lucifer, they had a lot of this genetic experimentation going on. They began manufacturing these hybrid creatures, by mixing different species. This issue of hybridization is like totally impossible for us to even begin to understand the extent of it, okay? Like how many species were experimented upon and how they were. There's actually a story, in these, I come across all kinds of information, and, I guess God has given me this ability to be able to look at like movies or, fiction, mythology, etc., and then relate it to the Bible. So once I read this story in this, there is this game called Dungeons and Dragons, okay? And this here, it's a fantasy game. And, it's become very, very big. There are like millions and billions of people, maybe even that play this game. And, it's called a role-playing game. And there's even a big movie coming out about Dungeons and Dragons, and I think next year or something. But anyways, one of the major characters in there is called this creature called Baphomet. Okay, and Baphomet, of course, is this this bull-headed or goat-headed creature. No, it's a bull. His head is that of a bull and the body of a man, etc. Okay, this creature existed. And what he does in this game is that he has a laboratory in which his main occupation is to do genetic experimentation, okay, where he's mixing species, where he's combining, he's doing all kinds of evil things in there. So where do you think these stories come from? Do you think that, some man just sitting in there, he said, okay, I'm going to imagine this, I'm going to have this creature? Yes, that information is inputted into the mind of these people that are involved in all these occult practices. And then they are given this imagery, like the movies, like in the movie Star Wars, for example, George Lucas. Do you think he just came up with all the imagery that we see in that, with all the different creatures that he had in there? No, somebody is inputting, that information is being downloaded from some outside source. So just, again, to cut it short, that, this is one of these activities that this creature in this game is involved in. It's quite developed, like this story about these creatures that they have in these, when you begin to understand it. How I came across that information, I don't know, but I found it to be very interesting. I said, yes, this is absolutely the truth. This is exactly what happened back in the day. And that's the world of Lucifer and of these dragon serpents. This is what they were doing. So therefore, that world that existed back then was really this world of these Dungeons and Dragons kind of places, of these Lord of the Rings fantasy worlds, okay, which we can't even, a person like me can't even begin to imagine, okay? It's just unreal. But that's what was going on, and that's what was happening in that day. Okay, that was that world that existed. That age, again, before Adam, is not even anywhere in sight at the moment, okay? And then that time of Lucifer, which I thought, like I said yesterday, originally I thought that it continued right into the time of this flood that we read about in Genesis 1-2. But no, now I would say, no, it did not. That he was judged and he was cast down, just like the angels had been before him. And the final age of evil in those days would become the age of these serpent dragons. They call Nagas. They are serpent people in India. They've been worshipped all over the world. Their evidence of their sanctuaries, their temples, etc., exists to this very day. It's everywhere. And that is the reason for that, is that age of evil is in which this Satan dragon was the chief ruler of evil, as he is still to this very day. That is the one age that is closest to the age of man, which will begin in Genesis chapter 1, verse 3. And therefore, being closest to us, it is the one about which we have the direct connection, and therefore the evidence that has been left on this earth to prove that these things actually happened. We have more of that evidence through these temples, through these tales, through these myths, through these legends of these Naga people and these serpent races, that they are everywhere, in every part of the world, in every culture, in every mythology, in every legends, in tribal lore, in Africa, in Asia, in South America, wherever you go. The one common thing that you see everywhere is the serpent, because before the judgment about which we read in Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 23 to 26, about God destroying that world by his fierce anger, destroying those cities of these serpent races and the other creatures that existed on the earth at that time, and which the condition of the earth that we find in Genesis 1-2, chapter 1, verse 2, it is because that was the world that existed. It was the world of these serpentine creatures, okay? That was that world. That doesn't mean that there weren't that the sons of God had completely vanished from here. No, Lucifer was judged and he was cast down, but I think some of them still continued. These hybrids, they continued. So there was a lot of variety of creatures that still existed, but except the chief, the one that ruled everything, was this Satan dragon. And then again, that time that God had appointed for the development of evil, it finally came to an end. So this history from Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 into the where we get to Genesis 1, chapter 1, verse 2, is quite long and extensive. And there is, I believe, at least an equal amount of time, probably, that construction time took a great deal of time, because God built the heaven, he built the earth, he built the heavens around it, filled them with all these living creatures, especially in the case of these sons of God. They were given the ability to reproduce, just like man was. And, when something is filled through reproduction, it develops over a lot of time. It takes time. So this earth was developed, it was built. And so all these ages took time. And then when God determined that evil had now reached, it had become absolutely evil when the way he needed it to be, before man could be made, before he would begin to execute the final stages of his plan, which was to bring into existence this creature called man, and to show him something which all the rest of his creatures had not been shown, which was to demonstrate to him his love. Okay, that could only happen once evil had reached this perfection, this absoluteness that he needed for it to become the absolute opposite of his own good. And when that had happened, then God, the time that was appointed for those evil ages was at an end, and God destroyed that world. That world, not just that existed on the earth, but even in the heavenly realms. They were all basically, almost all of God's creation at that point was destroyed. Several things happened as God, from the beginning, especially when the angels first rebelled. The rest of God's creatures couldn't understand what God was doing, why this was happening. Did God not know what he was doing? But slowly over these ages, as God demonstrated to them his power, and he destroyed all these evil beings, his whole creatures began to understand that, yes, there is a plan and there is a purpose, that he is the Almighty, he is the all-powerful, that nothing can stand against him in his power. But yet there was one power of his that was not revealed in those ages, one mystery that would be kept hidden until man was made, and God himself took the shape and form of a man, and that is the mystery and the revelation of the ultimate power of God, which is the power of love. The ultimate knowledge of God, his knowledge of his power, the knowledge of his science, the knowledge of his technologies, all the creatures saw it, as anybody that stood up against him was destroyed effortlessly. The angels were cast down. The sons of God, Luciferians, were destroyed. And ultimately Satan and all his serpent creature races, whatever else was with him, these hybrids like this Baphomet and all these creatures, they were all destroyed. And that, my friends, brings us to Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, that all these ages of evil are now in the past. That doesn't mean evil has come to an end. Evil will allow and be continued to exist for a period of time longer, until we get to Revelation chapter 19 and 20. And finally, this last ruler or last prince of evil, called Satan, and all his evil creatures, which are now disembodied spirits, although they existed in corporeal physical form right here on this earth back in the day, before Genesis 1-2. They are all going to be cast into the lake of fire, and this evil, having served the purpose for which God allowed it to come into existence, will be no more. Okay. So this brings us in Genesis 1-2, and the earth was without form and void, which means it was a ruined wasteland. And Jeremiah 4 tells us clearly that all this happened. All the cities were destroyed. The world was destroyed because of the fierce anger of God. I mean, that evil that they did in those days, like I said, we have no clue as to what went on and how patiently God endured all that, okay, because he needed it. So that's why this was a ruined wasteland. darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So that, my dear friends, is now we're going to move on into Genesis 1:3, because this is the history, the majority of the history of creation up until this point, up until the time of Genesis 1:3, is contained just in those two verses of scripture in Genesis 1:1 and in Genesis 1:2. In Genesis 1:3, we read, "Let there be light," and there was light. Now, like these translators themselves, they made an error. And, I'm not saying there's an error in the scripture or the translation itself in the case of 1611, but the notes that they added, they can have some misunderstanding in it because they understood things in a certain way. And, one thing here is that this is not saying in here in verse 3 that God is creating light. Light cannot be created because God is light. Okay. And God is not a created being. God is the creator. He has always existed. And therefore light has always existed. So he said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And what do we see here? What is this imagery we have at that time? This darkness covers the face of the earth. Darkness means it's an absence. The light is not visible in the state of that creation existing at that time, especially on the earth, okay? The light is not visible. And now when God says, "Let there be light," it is not he's saying that, okay, I'm going to create light now. What he is saying is that now this light that has always existed, it is going to become visible to his creation because the darkness has come. So what this darkness that existed and this light that came, this is spiritual darkness, evil, and spiritual light, good of God, okay? So this is because in this darkness, light could now shine. Light, the knowledge of God, literally, as we read in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, God who commanded the light to shine into darkness has shined in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. It is because of this darkness that the spiritual knowledge of God had now become possible. Up until that age, up until that time, all the creatures of God that existed, they had seen his power. They had seen his firepower. They had seen, like his military power, you could say, in opposing and destroying all these creatures that stood up against him. So they had seen his external power, but there was no possible way for them to look inside his heart. The knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ means that the face, the person, the being, the inner person of God was not visible to his creatures, but now the time had come when God would begin to reveal that which he was on the inside by bringing them the spiritual knowledge. This light that came in Genesis 1:3 that shined at that time, it was not the light of a sun or of a star or of the moon or of any kind of, physical object. It wasn't, because they didn't exist. This was the spiritual light of God himself. So now God is beginning to reveal himself on the inside because something had now come into existence in comparison to which God's creatures could begin to understand their God on the inside. Evil had come, spiritual darkness had come, death had come. So now there was a comparison. Now there was a comparison that, when in the presence of death, God could reveal to his creatures what life means. And ultimately, he would use that evil to reveal his love. And that is why all these things happen. So this light that we read about in verse 3, it is not a creation of light. It is just a revelation of light, which is God is light, the Bible tells us. So it is the revelation of himself. You could literally say God is saying, "Let there be God," in the sense not that God is bringing himself into existence. He has always existed, but it is showing us that, hey, creatures, now I'm going to reveal to you what I am on the inside. So having seen that, the face of Jesus Christ, the person of God is going to be revealed to you. And then you are going to be changed into that person in the case of man. And then you're going to be one with me, and we are going to have a relationship. That's what happened here. And God said, let there be light, and there was light, and God saw the light that it was good. Did God not know that the light was good? Why is this written here? It is not written here to say that, like God suddenly comes to understand the light is good. No, this is the knowledge that he has given to his creatures. Look, he said, you have seen darkness. You have seen how it is all destructive. It is evil. Now look at light. Okay. And now do you understand that when you have compared light to darkness, that it is light that is good? So what is coming to us now is, beginning in this verse of scripture, God defining for us what is good. Okay. God giving us the knowledge of good and of evil, giving us the knowledge of himself by comparing it to the knowledge of his opposite, which is Satan. That is why it was important for Satan and for evil to exist, so we could look at both and we could compare them both, and then we would know who is good and what is evil. So this is our beginning of our knowledge in the understanding of what is good. Okay. Good is something that is an absolute, and good can only be defined by somebody other than man. We all cannot define what good is, because then, I would have one definition, you'll have another one, somebody else will have another one. And, before you know it, there's like 10 billion people or whatever, and there are 10 billion definitions of good. So everybody ends up doing what they want to do. No, somebody higher and greater than us has to tell us what is good and what is evil. And this is our education in spirituality that begins right here. Spiritual understanding is the understanding of the knowledge of good and evil, is to be able to distinguish between them, is to be able to discern between them. It is not to call evil good and good evil, as people do all the time. But in Hebrews, in chapter 5, we read, strong meat belongs to those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. Okay. That's spiritual maturity is defined for us in the Bible. It is the discernment of understanding of good and evil as God teaches us, not the way man teaches or the devil teaches. The devil teaches people all the time what is good, but what he is telling them, he being a liar, he is actually making them believe something that is evil as being good. No, that is not how we define good. We define and we understand good. Our spiritual knowledge, it comes from God. Okay, that is it. Hebrews 5, I think it's 5:12, that, strong meat, spiritual maturity belongs to those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. Those who do not call evil good and those who do not call good evil. Okay, let's continue. God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And in the margin here, you can look at it, it's Hebrew, and the Hebrew tells us this verse is that it divided between the light and between the darkness. This idea of a separation between light and darkness, a division, it tells us that light and darkness are absolute. Light and darkness can never meet. They can never coexist. Light is light and darkness is darkness. Now we, in this world, we exist in what you might call a land of shadows. Okay, we have light, but there's also darkness here. And it is our job in this life to come to an understanding of what is light and what is dark, because they are absolutes. And it is only by understanding God that we can understand what is light and what is good. And this division between the light and the darkness, he divided between the light and between the darkness. What it is telling us, God is telling us that, hey, folks, light is light, darkness is darkness. They don't have anything in common. And this is something which we shall see in verse 5. And God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. So this here, on this very first day of recreation, into this, you could call the fourth or the fifth age of creation, which is the age of man, because this present age is the age of man. For all those ages that came before, they were like primarily the ages of evil, because evil was being born and grown in those ages. This age, evil has continued, but something greater than that has happened here, that God has literally come down here and revealed himself fully in this age, using that evil to us, to man, because this is the age in which God became a man, so that he could transform man into himself, into his person. Okay, so this here is the age of man that we are living in right now, which of course is the age of God. Okay, because all these ages are the ages of God, because everything has happened to serve his purposes. Okay, but this here, if you look at this verse carefully, the way it is worded in this 16:11, it says, God called the light day, and that word day is capitalized, and the darkness he called night. So this again is showing us something here, as we can understand that, there was no sun, there was no moon at that time. So this division of light and darkness into day and night, it is again signifying something on a spiritual level. It is not something that is happening because of some physical objects in the sky. It isn't. And this capitalization of the word day and of night tells us that these are proper nouns. These are literally spirits. These are personification of light and of darkness. So there is the place of light. You could say that day and night are places. They are dimensions at the very least, where the dimension of light is called day and the dimension of night is called night. In Greek mythology, night is a spirit. It's called Nyx, is a goddess, NYX. Okay, that that they have a goddess that they worship, which was called night. So this this separation into and personification of day and night into these separate places, separate divisions, is because in the end, man has a simple destiny. There is this dimension of light, which is called day, which is the dimension of God. There is this dimension of night or darkness, which is called night. That is the devil. Okay, so man's destiny is that in this time, God was going to place man between the two. He was going to place man between light and darkness, between day and night, between life and death. Okay, and man ultimately would end up in one of these two places. His end would be either in this dimension of light and of day, or in this dimension of darkness and of night. Jesus spoke about this outer darkness, and in Abraham, in that scripture in Luke in chapter 16, where was the story of the rich man who died and went to hell, and Lazarus the beggar went up to be with Abraham in paradise. Okay, Jesus talked about this outer darkness, and then Abraham said, hey, he talked to the rich man, and although they could see each other, he said there is a great gulf fixed between us. Okay, so these are real spiritual forces, whatever you want to call it, of light and darkness and day and night. And in the spirit world, in the spirit realm, they are completely separated. They don't join together. Like I said, we dwell in a land of gray, of shadows, as we read in Psalm 23, though I walk to the valley of the shadow of death, because it is placing us in here where we can have understanding and knowledge of both. The ultimate destiny is that we are going to be in one or the other. Either man is going to go into this light, the day, which we call heaven, which we call the place to be with God, or it's going to be in this other place, cast out into the darkness and never be able to, because these places are completely separate from each other, being absolutes, they can never meet. And therefore, once that separation is final, there is no hope to go over to the other side. Just like Abraham told that rich man, there is the gulf fixed, and we can't go over from you, and you can't come over from there to us. So again, there's a reason why they use these capital letters in here, which is like, literally a personification. It is telling us that these are actual places, they are dimensions of day and night, which are divisions, are spiritual divisions, because these were not based on something that existed, that happened because of, as a result of some sun up in the sky. As we shall see, there is no sun at this present time, yet there is day, yet there is night, yet there is light, yet there is darkness, okay, which is all spiritual. And that's why all through Genesis chapter 1, that darkness that covered in verse 2 was spiritual darkness, was evil, had covered God's creation just as he needed it to. And then when he said, let there be light, what happens when light comes? Darkness goes. And that's what God is teaching us there, that yes, evil has come, but my light is going to overcome that, okay? That light is the understanding of God in us that destroys the darkness that is in us. And then in verse 6, we move on. No, sorry, there is more here in this verse. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. Okay. This again is a very, very interesting verse of scripture, because this addresses the subject of time, which I really don't even want to touch, because it is such a complex subject, because this is telling us that time is existing. Okay. When as yet the sun and the moon and these other bodies by which we measure time on this in the earth here, they did not yet exist. So this is a division of what was happening based on certain events that were taking place. So time itself is not dependent upon the sun or the moon. Time is a creation of God, which, eternity, you think that eternity means an absence of time. But eternity is not necessarily an absence of time. Eternity literally is an absence of death, is what it is. But even in eternity, there'll be day and, there'll be days, and there'll be some sort of divisions of time will take place. Okay. So this is what we are learning here, is that when there was the evening and there was a morning, it wasn't the evening because the sun was setting or something, because the sun did not yet exist. And it does not even mean that there was some sort of change in the light was going down or something like that. That is not what it is telling us. It is simply telling us that God has his own clock. That God has his own, time, how he measures time, how time passes in when there are no heavenly bodies, time still exists. And it is something which another one of these creations of God, which he uses to measure the events that are transpiring, okay? So that is a complex topic, which I really don't want to spend a great deal of time in here, but I want to let you know that time is not dependent in cosmic terms. In spiritual terms, time does not depend on any heavenly body. It is something, the way God measures it is something which we don't fully comprehend. And I really don't even want to try to. I was trying to think about time, it really made my head hurt. So I don't want to go down there, because it's a very, very complex subject. And I don't think anybody really has an understanding of time. Science, etc., they try to tell you what it is, but they can't. Just like light, they don't understand light. They don't, most of the things that they teach us in science, they're false anyways. But especially in these important subjects of things like light and time, etc., they really don't have a clue. And therefore, we will wait until we get to that other place when perfect knowledge will come. Then we will be able to understand these concepts. But keep in mind that when it tells us the evening and the morning were the first day, in Hebrew, it's in the margin, you can read here, and the evening was, and the morning was. How was there an evening and how was there a morning when there is no sun in the sky? Well, I don't know, but God knows. And then in verse 6, it tells us, and God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters and let it divide the waters from the waters. Okay. And in Hebrew, it tells us that the word firmament is an expansion. So this is, let's read on here. Okay. God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. So essentially, God made this barrier or this division. So he takes the waters that are covering the earth, okay? Because we understand that, from verse 2, that the earth was covered with water. And he's taken these waters and is lifting them up off the surface of the earth. They are being lifted up. I mean, just imagine the power that is required to do that. We lift up a bucket of water and, we strain ourselves, but not here. In this case, God is lifting up the waters which were under the firmament, the waters which were above the firmament. So how much of these waters that were covering the earth were taken up there? I don't know. Probably a lot more than half the water that existed at the time. I would say the most of the water was lifted up there. Some kind of hydraulic mechanism is used. I don't know what this firmament is, whether it's like, something that is a physical object or is it just some kind of force field. We really don't know how God did this thing, but he basically made a roof over the earth. Okay. It's like having, one building and then you put on top of the roof, you build another structure. A building without a roof, and then you build the roof, and then there's something that, then you can access something and you fill that roof, or you build a pool or something on top and you fill it up with water. That's exactly how this is. What is being described here is that God is building something above. It's like a roof that is being built above the earth, and into that roof, he is pulling up these waters off the earth, and they are going up above. Okay. So up above us, when you look at the sky, that blue sky, that's, I'm looking outside here, I see this lake with some blue water in it. That is essentially what it is. It's like a gigantic pool of water. Just the volume of that, it really boggles my mind when I think about it, but it is there. And how exactly it stays in place, I don't know, but God knows, okay? And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. So he gave this name. The firmament is called heaven. And there is, again, in the Bible, the word heaven is used for, more than one place. The one place is, of course, which is the city of God, about which we read in verse 1, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven. That the heaven is a particular place, which is a city, which is above us, and it is the abode of the Most High. God himself dwells there. That is called heaven. And then in this case here, in verse 8, we read that God calls the firmament heaven. Now, what is interesting here is in both these cases, at least in this version of the Bible, if you look at this here, in verse 1, as you can see in the screen, heaven is capitalized. And if you go down to verse 8, in case of the firmament, this is also capitalized. So these are proper places, proper nouns that are being given to the firmament and to the city of heaven. So, we can draw some conclusions here that, we have the celestial realms up above us. They're generalized into a plural word called heavens, okay? But within these heavens themselves, there are three places which I believe are unique, and therefore they're capitalized. In 2 Corinthians, in chapter 12, Paul the apostle wrote that he was caught up to the third heaven. So I think there are three particular places that could be capitalized, which I don't want to dwell on too much because this is again speculation. One being this firmament, it is a proper place. And then above that would be another place, the second heaven, which may be the abode of the angelic races or whatever, the cherubim and all them. They are the princes of God. We can read about in Daniel, talks about the chief prince Michael. So, there are these angels which have their own domains and their own dimensions which we dwell in. So, that could be the second heaven, and that would also be capitalized. And then, of course, there's a city of heaven above that, the third heaven. So that's just speculation on my part as to why this firmament is capitalized as the heaven, as heaven. Okay, I don't know why it would be, but that's my guess that that's the reason why. And God said, let the waters under the firmament be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. This is again teaching us something here. Most that the people that talk about that creation is beginning in Genesis chapter 1, verse 3, with the beginning of these 6 days. These 6 days in Genesis chapter 1 into verse chapter 2, they are not the original days of creation. These are the days of recreation, of reformation, of repair, of reconstruction of that which was constructed in the very beginning a long time ago. And this we can understand from this verse of scripture. He says, well, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. So there is nothing in these verses that tell us that God is creating the water, that he's creating the sea, or he's even creating the earth. What does it say here? Let the dry land appear. So it is not telling us that God is making the dry land. Okay. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So this earth had already been created a very long time ago. And for some reason, it has come to be in a state of, ruin, covered with water, but it is still under the waters. The earth that was created a long time is still existing, long time ago is still existent. And that's why it tells us, let the dry land appear. It is not telling that God is now creating the dry land. He says, yeah, the dry land was created a long time ago. It's been covered with water, just like it was in the days of Noah, but except this time, it's not the time of Noah, it's a time long before Noah. And it's saying is now, let's remove these waters off the earth and let the dry land appear, okay, come into view, literally what that means. So this is what was going on at that time. God takes off most of these waters off the earth, places them above the earth in this place called the firmament. So obviously he builds this firmament is built like a pool of water. It has a floor, and I'm sure it has some walls within which these waters are contained. And then underneath this earth that is left, it is divided into a place of the waters, into a container for the waters called the seas, and the dry land is now coming into view. And God called the dry land earth. See, the earth here is again capitalized in verse 10. So it is telling us that this is the same earth that God originally created in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. It had disappeared from view because it was under the waters, but it is not a new body that God is making. He is again repairing and fixing that which he had first created a long time ago. When the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the water, I visualize that God is now checking everything out. Like when you have a major flood or something, you see the president, he gets up in a helicopter and he's flying above it, taking a look below. That's kind of what will need to be done. Then they send these people that go and survey the damage, and they say, okay, this will have to be rebuilt, this will have to be repaired. That's exactly what God was doing at that time. And then he has brought into view one more time this dry land, which had already existed, that was created in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas, and God saw that it was good. And again, this is God telling us that destruction and ruin is not good. But when I'm making this place a habitation on which life is going to flourish once again, that is good. So God is looking at it, and by using that phrase, God saw that it was good. He is giving us his vision. He is giving us what he sees so that we can have that same sight. We can have that same understanding. We can be on the same spiritual level as him and be able to now comprehend that evil and darkness is not good. Life and growth and, being healthy and nourished is good. That's what he said. The earth, when he saw that it was dry land that appeared upon which life would now, take place, that is good. So all these phrases in there, God saw that it was good. It is not that God didn't already know that it was good. He knew it was good because he had planned it a long time ago. He is writing these things in there for us to come to that knowledge and understanding that this is good. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed was in itself upon the earth, and it was so. See this here, I love this little margin notes they have in here. God said, let the earth bring forth grass. And in it here is telling us tender grass in the Hebrew. That word grass is actually means it's called tender grass. So again, this state of the earth as it is being refilled and again being made fit for habitation. It is not a place which is going to be a place of thorns and thistles, which came later on. Okay. This was literally is a place of paradisical where even the grass is tender and it is, everything is, nothing about this place is threatening or dangerous as we are reading here. God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind. And again, I've discussed that subject of kind, which is very, very important, that, God in the beginning, he divided everything, the plants, the trees, whatever, into different kinds. And he wrote the encoding that would make possible for that kind to multiply itself. That is called the seed. A seed has an encoding. That encoding has been written by God. He is the great programmer of everything that exists. And he put that within that plant. He makes that plant within which he makes a seed in which he writes a code. He said, okay, now I don't need to make all these plants myself. All that has to happen is the seed has to fall into the ground and it will multiply and grow because it is instructed that that's what that seed must do. This kind is origination is with God, whether it's the kind of man or it's the kind of beast or it's the kind of plants, it is all comes from God. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after its kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth, and it was so. And that was a verse that I had talked about a lot in that past about this herb yielding seed and being in itself, the seed being in itself, which, the story about these angels being able to reproduce. God never gave them seed. They have no seed in themselves. Even if they can appear as man, this is just a little bit of a digression. They can appear in the form of a man, but still they don't have seed, so they cannot multiply by having a relationship with a woman. It's an impossibility. And this idea of seed coming from God and being placed, whether it's in man or in beast, it is very, very important principle in the Bible. And the earth brought forth grass, and the herb yielding seed after its kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after its kind, and God saw that it was good. Again, being fruitful, the earth is being made fruitful. The earth, being symbolic, like of a woman, for example, the womb of a woman giving birth, being fruitful, multiplying, that is good. Life multiplying itself is good. God is telling us, not death, not darkness, not destruction, construction, building, formation, multiplication. This is good. And the evening and the morning were the third day. All right, so let's stop this here now into upon the third day. We'll continue on into the fourth day and into the creation of man, which was the ultimate purpose for which God began this creation to begin with. And we'll pick it up next time. All right. So, dear friends, here we are once again at the end of this one session into so much information that, it really is something that we can talk and talk and talk and talk and never really get to the depths of the information that is contained in it, in this very one chapter, especially as we get into verse 26 and 27, God said, let us make man in our image. so much information there, but I hope that, at least this idea, understanding a history of what happened in the past, it is going to bring us to the place where we can understand what God is doing in the present and what he has planned for the future, because everything has already been predetermined. The story has already been written, and God is revealing to us more and more of those plans and purposes, and even so much that we can, the understanding of his love, which he gives us, it is something which is really, really precious, because we are told that, and Peter wrote that even angels desired to look into those things that God has revealed to us. What a blessing we have been given. Stop this here now, and we'll pick it up again, God willing. We'll pick it up next week, and we'll continue this study. I want to, move along a little bit faster, perhaps because I want to bring it up to chapter 11, because that history of that is in Genesis up into chapter 11 is basically, it all is happened to bring us to the place where we are today, but just the nature of the worlds that existed prior to our present time is quite different. And you know what? Like, for one thing, we see the evidence of that in the ruins, in the structures that exist on the earth itself till this very day. And they point to something that is different than what we see in our time, that it could not have been built by people like us. So, that understanding is very, very interesting, to say the least. But the history of the world as it is today, I think it begins more after the Tower of Babel time. The world that starts, with the patriarchs, with Abraham and such, it has a great deal of similarity. It is more similar to what we see even up until today. But up in that time, from the beginning of creation into the time even up to the Tower of Babel, those worlds had, they were substantially different than what they are today. And we can understand that points to a very long history of creation, much longer than we generally have been led to believe. And if it is in the Bible, then we should study it, and we should understand as much of it as it is possible for us to do. All right, thank you. God bless you all, and have a blessed week, and in Jesus Christ our Lord. And Isaiah 26:3, thou will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, because he trusts in thee. So let's try and do that all week long.
If you don't mind waiting, I think I'll slowly walk your way. You seem to know him when you start preaching, and you just may. Don't want no bells to toll, just want the clouds and me to roll away. You claim this Jesus will come and dine with me if I just pray. I don't know where I'm going, I just can't carry on. I need a change of pace, I'm running out of space. I need Jesus, Jesus right now. I got down on my knees and prayed that God would help me believe. I whispered to the wind, please Jesus help me win victory from sin. I prayed he'd cleanse my heart and have a prayer